What astonishing progress. 5 points to Hufflepuff each. Those words weren't only heard in Professor McGonagall's Transfiguration class, they echoed in Professor Flitwick's Charms lesson as well. Perched on his stack of books, Flitwick's voice brimmed with surprise and curiosity. So, Mr. Burns, Mr. Smith, and Mr. Thorne, how did the three of you manage to improve the stability and precision of the levitation charms so dramatically in such a short time? Why three people? Because Lynn was always the standout cheater. Edgar rose, cheeks flushing a little as he offered an embarrassed explanation. Professor, because we went farming on the weekend. Farming? Flitwick adjusted his glasses, as if his ears must have misheard. William stepped in then, speaking in his usual clear, organized way, and briefly described their extracurricular practice last Sunday. How they'd used transfiguration to make tools and then applied the levitation charm to control them for tilling the soil. Ha! Ha! Flitwick burst into delighted laughter, his tiny body trembling atop the pile of books. Merlin, what an inventive and sensible training method. Combining spellwork with practical labor not only exercises fine control, but also brings the joy of honest work. Very creative. Considerable approval from me. After class, a group of Ravenclaws, known for their studiousness, approached William, skepticism and curiosity on their faces. William, your progress with the levitation charm, was it really from farming? The explanation sounded a bit too earthy for Ravenclaw's taste for theoretical purity. Of course. Before William could say more, Lynn cut in with a smile that was all charm. Practice is the only test of truth. If you don't believe me, you can go to our vegetable patch and try it yourselves. The results are immediate. Spotting the Ravenclaw's interest, Lynn seized the moment. Right now, actually, this afternoon, we're doing the next step, loosening the soil before sowing. The site and tools are all set. Half convinced and half skeptical, the Ravenclaws couldn't resist the chance to test an efficient learning method. They agreed and followed Lynn to the vegetable patch. Edgar elbowed William on the way, whispering in mild complaint. He's shameless, tricked a few more free laborers with just a few words. Ollie said nothing, only nodding. His expression matched Edgar's. Look at the corners of his mouth. He's practically grinning from ear to ear, William added, pushing his glasses up and delivering the precise jab. If Lynn had overheard, he would have protested indignantly. How is that shameless? It's mutual benefit, Lynn would have replied. They get practical experience and improve their spell work. We get faster soil preparation and speed up planting the strawberries. Everyone's willing. Fair trade. After the impromptu lesson, Lynn watched the Ravenclaws handle the levitated tools with satisfaction. They all declared that it did indeed help cultivate finer control. Humming happily, Lynn returned to the dormitory. Ravenclaws really are diligent and quick learners. As soon as he walked in, he started bragging, face alight with the thrill of a successful scheme. Well, how'd the invite go? William looked up from his book, amused. It couldn't have gone better. Lynn snapped his fingers, beaming. They worked even faster than you lot did at the start. They picked it up instantly. Their motions were textbook, and the efficiency was amazing. The soil's been loosened twice already. All that's left is planting the strawberry seedlings. I've even sent an owl to Hogsmeade for high-quality seedlings. Black-hearted capitalist, Ollie said finally, abandoning his earlier silence for a blunt verdict. Same to you. Lynn didn't mind. A few barbs didn't matter. Someone else had done the work, and strawberries were practically assured. In high spirits, he flopped onto his bed, smiling as he started to drift off. Then he suddenly sat bolt upright. He'd nearly forgotten the mysterious pet egg the system had given him. He rushed to the table and pulled the egg from his system space. It was about the size of an ostrich egg, its shell a magnificent gold streaked with red, flame-like patterns. Lynn turned it over in his hands, trying to guess what kind of magical creature might be inside. A phoenix? A fire salamander? Something else entirely? Luckily, the system had included a thin little breeding manual. He opened it eagerly and found only a few sparse lines. Breeding instructions. Environment. Keep comfortably warm. Avoid extreme cold and damp. Diet. No feeding required before hatching. After hatching, provide clean water and fresh food. If conditions permit, a small amount of special nutrient may be given to assist growth. Note, patience is a virtue. Lynn's mouth twitched at the perfunctory manual. That's it, and they call this a manual. It's practically nothing. At that moment, Edgar returned to the dormitory and immediately saw the conspicuous golden red egg on Lynn's table. Wow, Lynn, whose egg is that? The colors are amazing. Edgar leaned over to touch it. Lynn moved the egg possessively closer and lied without changing his expression. I found it near the Forbidden Forest. It looked special, so I thought I'd try raising it and see if it hatches. Already, he was planning to visit the library the next day to hunt down more information, maybe even a recipe for that mysterious zero nutrient, so he could brew some himself. He sighed dramatically, imagining a fluffy, or maybe scaly little creature pecking its way out of the shell. The picture moved him. He almost felt tearful at his own anticipatory, overprotective, fatherly tenderness. The moment the potion's bell rang, the students hurried to gather their things, eager to leave the cold, dimly lit dungeon classroom. Professor Snape, his black robes trailing behind him, was striding back toward his office when a deliberately sweet voice called out behind him. "Dear Professor, wait for me." Snape stopped in an instant. The air around him seemed to chill. Who, of all people, had the gall to address him in that saccharine tone? He turned slowly, eyes narrowing until they were mere slits, and saw Lynn smiling brightly, the picture of false innocence. "Mr. Lynn," Snape said, his voice colder than usual, "if you address your professor with that nauseating tone and that—" He made a small, contemptuous motion, grinning. "I will ensure your house's gems vanish at a rate you cannot imagine." Lynn didn't miss a beat, still smiling, and leaned in a little closer. "Professor, 5 points from Hufflepuff," Snape snapped. "Reason, disregarding a professor's authority and frivolous behavior." "I was wrong, Professor." Lynn straightened instantly, his earlier expression wiped clean and replaced by sincere contrition so fast it would have fooled anyone less observant. Internally, he hissed at Snape, "Old curmudgeon. His heart is smaller than a needle's eye. If it weren't for those ingredients I can't get by normal means, I wouldn't be bothering him." Of course, Lynn had come for ingredients. He'd found several potion recipes in the library that looked ideal for a nutrient solution for pets, but a number of the components were rare. Snape looked him over with clinical disapproval. "Speak, why did you stop me?" Lynn asked, then corrected himself. "Why did you stop walking, Professor?" "If your purpose is nothing more than to seek attention or waste my time," Snape began, "I've come to beg for your guidance in potions, Professor," Lynn said quickly, knowing Snape's patience for theatrics was short. Snape studied him again. He remembered Lynn's performance in class earlier. There had been talent there, a near instinctive sense for ingredient properties and temperature control, and the audacity to deviate from the textbook where it mattered. It had been reckless, in Snape's opinion, but it had produced results marginally better than the standard method. He would not allow himself a compliment beyond that. "Come with me," he finally grunted, turning toward his office. "And I hope you're not one of those fools who squander ingredients." The office was dim and smelled of dried herbs and stewing potions, but it was less offensive than Professor Quirrell's perpetual garlic. Large jars in a corner held preserved organs. Bookshelves sagged under the weight of thick, black-spined tomes. Snape regarded Lynn with narrowed eyes. "Which potions, beyond your capabilities, do you wish to be guided in?" he asked. "Frost-resistant syrup, Professor," Lynn replied, naming something that sounded advanced enough to be impressive. Snape's mouth twitched, his expression darkened. "Choose another." Frost-resistant syrup's main component was the extremely rare Frost Daisy. Even Snape's private stores contained only a handful. Why not ask for Felix Felicis, he thought. Lynn blinked and recalibrated. "Then all-reviving potion," he offered, switching to something even more dramatic. "Lynn," Snape's voice tightened, "if you propose any more potions that I find impossible for you to brew, leave my office." Lynn quickly adjusted his ambitions downward. "Then, vitality tonic, Professor. I should be able to manage that." Snape snorted, grudgingly conceding the choice. He unlocked a cabinet and brought out a pot of still-wriggling mandrake roots, a few vials of pepper-up elixir, several fluffy vitality dandelions, and other auxiliary ingredients, setting them carefully on the table. "I trust I do not have to teach you this step by step," he said. "Of course not, Professor. Just supervise. Correct me if I'm wrong," Lynn replied, folding himself into a pose of earnest study. He fitted earmuffs, prepared the mandrake with the practiced, careful motions of someone who had handled them before, and brewed a mandrake reviver as the base. He methodically processed the other ingredients, precisely grinding, extracting juices, timing additions, and adjusting heat in stages. Snape remained in the shadows, arms crossed, already composing a list of possible point deductions on account of wasted ingredients. Lynn's technique strayed from the textbook. Snape had done the same in his youth, and he was not particularly perturbed by deviations that showed understanding rather than ignorance. The process flowed with a competence that forced a grudging respect. When the cauldron finally yielded a clear, pale green potion that gave off a gentle, life-bright aura, Snape stepped forward. He scooped some with a long-handled silver spoon, assessed its consistency, sniffed, and preserved the inscrutable expression that everyone had learned meant barely acceptable. "Passable," he said through clenched teeth. Lynn was unconcerned with praise. He bottled the bulk of the vitality tonic, bowed, and left Snape's office with a light skip in his step, a small trophy tucked under his arm. He paused to savor his success for only a moment before the corridor turned into a rumor mill. By the time he'd taken 3 steps, whispers followed him like a draft. "Did you hear? Lynn from Hufflepuff was bribed by Snape with a top-grade potion," a senior Hufflepuff murmured. "Bribed? Definitely hush money," a Ravenclaw girl with an amused glint in her eye added. "You remember the other rumors, though." "Snape," someone else began, and the whispers mushroomed into scandalous speculation of every sort, some more outrageous than others. A passing Slytherin, evidently combining snippets he'd overheard, asked why Lynn wasn't dueling Dumbledore yet. By the time the gossip reached Lynn, the vitality tonic felt less like a trophy and more like a heat on his palms. He stormed back into the Hufflepuff common room, furious, and found Edgar sitting with William and Ollie, sharing a bag of sweets. "Edgar," Lynn shouted, "look at those ridiculous rumors you put out. Look at what they've turned into." No one can be unlucky forever. Late at night in Hogwarts, some students could not suppress their adventurous streak. Tonight, the Hufflepuff quartet had once again taken up that tradition. "I'm telling you, you can't be unlucky forever." "Luck evens out," Lynn said as he led the way, pushing hanging vines aside and trying to bolster his friends with what he called his law of conservation of luck. Running into a dark wizard last time was a fluke. That sort of great luck is extremely rare. Silence answered him, broken only by the crunch of leaves underfoot. "Come on, at least react," Lynn called back. "Honestly, the best thing you can do right now is be quiet," William said, pushing his glasses up and watching the dark shapes of the trees. "Stop spouting philosophical nonsense that might attract something we don't want to meet." Lynn fell momentarily speechless, then muttered, "I didn't make you come out here with a wand." All right. Edgar interjected, though he still gripped his wand. "We're here already. Lynn, didn't you say you needed potion ingredients? Let's find them and get out. We'll stick to the edge of the forest." They followed the faint light of their wand tips until they reached a patch of the forbidden forest. Lynn had flagged from an old library book as Mooncalf territory. The air smelled faintly of mint and moonlight. Silver feathers shimmered on the ground. They didn't go deeper than the perimeter, only gathering the discarded plumes with care. "By the way, Lynn," William said, slipping a particularly pretty feather into a small bag enchanted with an undetectable extension charm, "are you really that short on potion materials? You've been living in the common room brewing potions." "How could I not be?" Lynn sighed, the hardships of providing for a family written on his face. "The egg I picked up came with an instruction manual. It says after hatching it needs to be fed potions to supplement its nutrition. To research recipes and practice brewing, my pocket money's gone. I've even been scavenging scraps from Professor Snape's stores. Practice, you know." It was true. Lynn had managed to get materials from Snape by using his potion's favor talent, persistent pestering, and giving half of his finished brews as tribute. He'd even produced difficult concoctions, frost-resistant syrup, and full recovery potion, by being, as he put it, very thick-skinned, and handed a large share to Snape. So despite Snape's poisonous tongue, he was, in terms of supply, a somewhat stingy sponsor rather than an old bat. "The harvest's good," Lynn went on. Shall we check a little further along the edge? Edgar eyed the bulging bag. Is this really a Hufflepuff? He thought. Lynn shrugged. I'm fine with whatever. Up to you guys. William exchanged a look with Ollie, then hesitated. Well, as long as we don't go deep. We shouldn't be so unlucky that something goes wrong again, right? Just a bit further. Ollie nodded as usual, and they pressed on. The forest grew quieter until they could hear only their own breathing and heartbeats. After about 10 minutes, Lynn suddenly stopped. I don't like this. I've got a bad feeling, he whispered. They trusted Lynn's instincts. His last hunch had saved them, so William, Edgar, and Ollie hustled behind thick trunks and held their breath. Lynn, guided by the same uneasy sense, raised his wand and without thinking fired, Expelliarmus! A muffled cry came from the bushes and the clack of a wand hitting the ground. Lynn, surprised to have actually hit something, immediately cast a shield charm and slipped into a disillusionment charm, creeping toward the sound. When he pushed the branches aside, he froze. 2 red-haired boys in Gryffindor robes were there. One rubbed his wrist and grimaced. His wand lay a few steps away. The other, almost identical, gripped his wand warily and scanned the trees. The twins. Lynn let his disillusionment fall and stepped forward to say, Are you all right? It's a misunderstanding. Stupefy, one of the twins fired without missing a beat. The crimson bolt slapped against Lynn's pre-existing shield charm with a sharp clang and vanished. Oh, hey! We're on the same side, Lynn shouted, waving. The twins froze when they recognized his robes and that slightly helpless teenage face. George, stop! It's a little badger. Looks like a first year, Fred said, patting his brother to halt the attack. They lowered their wands, shaken but curious, as they sized up Lynn and the 3 Hufflepuffs peeking from behind trees. Lynn introduced himself with a relieved breath. First-year Hufflepuff. Fred Weasley. George Weasley, the twins offered in turn, smiles already playing on their faces. So you lot sneaking into the Forbidden Forest tonight, are you after the local specialties too? Fred asked, kicking a patch of fluorescent mushrooms. What else have you got? Edgar stepped fully out from behind his tree, still a little sharp. Are you lot out here to practice scaring people? George laughed and leaned in to inspect the bulging bags. Nice haul. Mooncalf feathers, huh? You've got a good eye. This stuff, if you find the right collectors, not that I mean black market, can fetch you some pocket money. Where's the fish? Where's the fish? Saturday, bright and sunny, brought another welcome day off at Hogwarts. In the Hufflepuff dormitory, Lynn was already dressed and delivering his day-off manifesto to his 3 roommates, who were still cocooned in their warm blankets. Rest? Only those who don't plan to contribute to the future of the wizarding world get to rest, Lynn declared, hands on his hips, voice ringing with conviction. Edgar poked half his head out from under the covers and squinted sleepily. What's gotten into him? What are you doing so early? William pulled his blanket up and mumbled, voice muffled. Who knows? Just ignore him. Even the best student had trouble escaping the blanket's gravitational pull on a weekend morning. Lynn ignored his roommate's inertia and left in high spirits for Professor Quirrell's office, ready for his weekly dark arts tutoring session. Very good. You weren't late this time. You must have practiced the last lesson well, Quirrell said as Lynn arrived. Next, what sort of spell would you like to learn? Quirrell asked. Lynn thought a moment and stated his requirements plainly. High power, not well known, preferably secret. The remnant of Lord Voldemort that possessed Quirrell felt a pleased tug at the words. Power and secrecy, signs of the dark path. Interesting, Quirrell said. I just happen to have a spell I created myself. Would you like to try it? Lynn could hardly refuse. Of course. A spell you created, Professor, must be extraordinary. Voldemort smiled inwardly and demonstrated. He flicked his wand with hidden, precise motions toward a training dummy in the corner and spoke the incantation smoothly and clearly. Sectum Sempra. A razor-sharp magical force cleaved through the air. With a sickeningly clean shink, the hard training dummy was sliced in 2 as if by the sharpest blade, a cut so smooth it chilled the blood. Voldemort thought with grim satisfaction. A spell taught by a servant, who can say it wasn't mine? Using a spell invented by Snape to groom another potential tool is perfect. And for Lynn, the acquisition was instantaneous. Engraved successful, obtained magic, Sectum Sempra. By the time he left Quirrell's office, it was still early. Feeling restless, Lynn decided to go fishing. Back in the dormitory, only William had managed to free himself from the blankets and sat by the window reading. The other two were still off visiting the Duke of Zhou in their dreams. "Want to go fishing?" Lynn offered. William didn't even look up. "No thanks. I'm going to finish Chapter 3 of Beginner's Transfiguration Theory today. Good luck catching anything. Bring us an extra dish for lunch." Study, study. How did you end up in Hufflepuff?" Lynn grumbled, grabbed his beloved rod, and headed for the Black Lake alone. At his usual spot, Lynn baited the line and cast with practiced ease. Then came the long wait, until suddenly the float plunged with a force unlike anything he'd ever felt. Lynn snatched the rod as it nearly ripped from his hands. A monstrous power surged from beneath the water, up the line and through the rod, slamming into his arms. He was jerked so hard he stumbled, nearly toppling headfirst into the Black Lake. "Hey, damn it! You trying to test me?" he shouted. He didn't hesitate to cast a great strength charm on himself, assuming such charms existed. Power flooded his limbs. He planted his feet and began to tug back against whatever giant thing was on the other end. The rod bowed into a deep curve, whining with strain. Buzz, 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 snap! A sharp, sudden break. The weight on the line vanished. Lynn collapsed onto the ground. He looked down to find only half a carbon fiber rod in his hands, the break jagged. His favorite rod, his companion through many triumphs and defeats, had met a heroic end. "My fishing rod." He trudged back to the dormitory, half a rod in hand and mood in tatters. You're back? Where's the fish, and what's with that half rod?" William fired off questions. Lynn muttered, "The fish is still on the hook." "And where's the hook?" "In the water." "Why is it in the water?" The more he talked, the more Lynn's indignation rose. He launched into a vivid account for William, how he'd wrestled a prehistoric leviathan, how thrilling and fierce the struggle had been, and how the rod had exploded under the strain. By the time he finished, regret and fury had fermented into determination. He went straight to the library. "A muggle fishing rod can't handle a creature from the magical lake. Then I'll make one myself." He headed to the alchemy section. As he hefted a brick-thick copy of Basic Principles of Alchemy, a system prompt chimed in his head at the perfect moment. Ding. Task issued. Personally craft a fishing rod that satisfies yourself. Reward. Primordial harmony. When you craft alchemical items, the fusion of materials, rune engraving, and magical attunement will proceed with exceptional harmony and ease, as if following a natural rhythm. This greatly reduces failure rates and raises the chance your creative ideas will succeed, provided you have enough supporting knowledge. Want to make a fishing rod that never comes back empty-handed? Ignore it? No chance. "A rod that never comes back empty-handed?" he protested inwardly. "That goes against my fishing ethics." Even if his fishing ethics were a bit shaky, his practical goals were simple. It had to be tougher, more resilient, able to withstand those dishonorable monsters in the Black Lake. The rest could wait. Carrying a stack of books, Alchemy from Beginner to Master, The Complete Guide to Ancient Runes, Properties and Fusion of Magical Materials, Lynn returned to his usual window seat. There he found a familiar figure. "Good afternoon," he said, setting the books down. "Good afternoon," Hermione replied, glancing up. Her eyes flicked over the titles with mild surprise. "You're studying alchemy?" "Yeah," Lynn said, tapping the thick Basic Principles of Alchemy. "My fishing rod broke, so I'm going to make a sturdier one." Hermione seemed about to offer advice, then shook her head. "Oh, well, good luck. I don't know the first thing about alchemy, so I can't help much." She paused, then changed the subject. "By the way, how's your vegetable patch? What did you plant?" "Strawberries," Lynn said, smiling at the thought. "I'll bring you some when they're ripe, absolutely fresh." "Thanks in advance," Hermione said with a small smile, then buried her head back in a study of major turning points in the history of magic. 25. Subduing beasts with reason. Lynn lay sprawled on his bed in the Hufflepuff dormitory in a perfect star shape, staring at the ceiling and muttering gloomily to himself. The main structure of the rod is almost finished. Dragon heartstring fused with walnut. The flex and feel are perfect. But this damn fishing line. Where do you get something thin and transparent that can still hold a big fish from the Black Lake? "It's been over a week, Lynn. Has your legendary fishing rod still not been born? Edgar asked, looking at the half-finished rod on the table. It had taken shape and shimmered with a faint magical glow. It's still missing its most crucial soul, the fishing line. Lynn sat up with a kip-up and struck what he fancied was a masterful pose. Ordinary materials, like unicorn tail hair, are too soft and brittle. They just won't match the style of a rod that's destined to go down in angling history. Oh, come on. Why don't you just admit that after buying those insanely expensive potion ingredients, you have no galleons left for enchanted silk? Edgar said, merciless. Lynn rolled his eyes. The huge sum he'd had before term had dwindled to almost nothing after potion ingredients and his first, very expensive alchemy experiments. Magical research was a money pit. He slumped back down and let his gaze drift to the ceiling, to the near-invisible spiderwebs glinting in the corners. Suddenly his eyes lit up. That night, the forbidden forest was a dense, breathing black. Lynn went deeper, guided by a sense of danger and a vague memory of direction. Where on earth is the cave spider nest? Why is it so hard to find? He muttered, wand tight in his hand. He skirted swamps of venomous tentacula, sidestepped a group of sleeping floopers, and almost trod on a puffskein, pretending to be a rock. At last he reached an area where the trees were twisted into grotesque shapes, the ground veiled with slimy white webbing, and the air heavy with a fishy sweetness and rot. Visual and olfactory effects maxed out, he thought. This must be the spider's luxury nest. Lynn cleared his throat, pressed his wand to his neck, and cast Sonorous. Then, in as polite a voice as he could manage while still being loud, he bellowed toward the cave entrance. Hey! Spider friends inside! A guest has come to visit. Is it convenient to come out and chat for a bit? About borrowing some of that sturdy silk you produce. No spiders came out to greet him. Looks like he would have to go in. He set a continuous shield charm around himself and stepped inside. The cave was bigger and more complex than he'd expected, with tunnels branching in every direction. Webbed cocoons of all sizes clung to the walls. Curious, he burned a small patch of webbing with a controlled incendio and revealed a comatose jobber gnoll. Well, their business range is impressive, he said, extinguished the flame, and pushed deeper. As he followed what seemed to be the main tunnel, Peter's jolt suddenly gave a sharp warning. He ducked instinctively. A dark shape, smelling foul, lunged where he'd just been standing. Depulso, he shouted reflexively, and the shadow careened sideways, slamming into rock. At the same time, he heard the spider's craving cry echoing, Food! Food delivered to the door! Attack! This was not the use he'd expected for his affinity ability. He wasn't a snack. Hey, big guy, let's negotiate, Lynn called, pointing his wand at a spider that had righted itself and was about to pounce. Wizard, flesh, tasty, the spider replied, rushing forward, chelicerae clicking. Lynn tried not to let irritation show. Can't you communicate? He thought, but he didn't move slowly. Flipendo, alarte ascendare. He blasted the pouncing spider with a combination of knockback and rocket charms, flipping it into the ground until it lay dazed with a cracked carapace. Still want to eat me? Look at my eyes. Answer me. Lynn pointed his wand at the spider's cluster of compound eyes, trying a final appeal. Eat, the spider insisted, struggling. Lynn gave an exasperated sigh. Fine. Then there's no other way. Sectum Sempra flashed. The stubborn spider split open and collapsed. He muttered, flicking his wand. I just wanted to find some sensible spiders to do business with. From then on, Lynn's progress through the nest became a one-sided campaign of persuasion. Sectum Sempra, an ambusher dropping from above, was finished. Defindo, webs and blocking spiders were cut away. Reducto, a lunging spider blasted apart. Confringo, a group of smaller spiders scattered in a gout of light. Beams of spell light danced through the tunnels, mingled with the hissing of spiders and the sick crack of carapaces splitting. He reasoned his way to the core of the nest. At last, he stepped into a relatively open cavern and found himself encircled by the remaining spiders. They had clearly seen what had happened to their companions and merely hemmed him in without daring to advance. Lynn looked around, tapped his wand on his palm, and adopted an annoyingly gentle tone. Are you the only ones left? Is there anyone more powerful? A boss, perhaps? Call them out so we and I can talk. No, no more. Really no more. A slightly larger spider squeaked, trembling. Very good, Lynn said, satisfied, nodding toward a mass of exceptionally thick silks glittering silver gray behind the spiders. Then I won't be polite. I'll borrow some silk, no problem, right? No, no problem. Take as much as you want. Just please, stop using that terrible reasoning, the trembling spider begged. After Lynn's thorough hands-on persuasion, this cluster of cave spiders had apparently learned the benefits of hospitality and the value of paying a guest. They cooperated meekly. Lynn accepted a bundle of top-tier spider silk whose strength exceeded anything he had imagined. He waved to the shivering spiders. Thanks. Let's cooperate again if there's a chance. 26. One task after another. Ding, task completed. Reward talent primal resonance has been distributed. The system notification chimed just as the fishing rod in Lynn's hands was declared finished. It was a strange, wonderful thing. Walnut wood braided with mithril, dragon heartstring, giant spider silk, and a host of other materials he'd scavenged and refined through alchemy. The rod pulsed with a warm luster, light in the hand yet unbreakably tough. Every joint and curve matched the perfect fishing rod he'd pictured. Success! Lynn crowed, stroking it like a treasured pet. Fishing. I have to go fishing right now, immediately. By the black lake, the sun was comfortable, and a breeze skimmed the surface, sending ripples across the water. A Hufflepuff and a Gryffindor sat side by side on the shore. Hermione had run into Lynn earlier, on her way to the library, and, curious about his gleeful new acquisition, had detoured to watch him test it. "Are you sure this alchemical fishing rod you made will actually work?" she asked. "Of course it will." Lynn's confidence overflowed as he patted his rod. "I'm not bragging, but with this divine weapon and my years of hard-earned, profound fishing skill, if the king of fish in the Black Lake doesn't bite the hook today, that'll be a personal insult." Hermione snorted. "My dad says the same thing. He calls himself the god of riverside fishing." "Oh? And then?" Lynn's curiosity was immediate. He could sense a good story. Hermione flushed and looked sheepish. "Then I followed him all afternoon, and he didn't catch a single scale. In the end, we had to go to the supermarket and buy one to make up the numbers." Lynn almost laughed out loud. Sometimes luck just isn't on your side. What happened after that?" "We bought a sea bass, and I told Mum that I caught it personally," Hermione finished, cheeks pink. Lynn finally burst out laughing, but cut it off when Hermione shot him a withering look. He pretended to fiddle with his rod and cleared his throat. "Ahem. Anyway, this fishing rod is a genuine masterpiece." They waited. Hermione, getting a little bored, pulled simple alchemy crafting from her bag and began to flip through it, while Lynn stared expectantly at his unmoving float. Suddenly, the float slammed beneath the surface with a violent yank, stronger than any bite he'd felt before. "Something's on!" Lynn cried, muscles tensing. Hermione set her book aside and peered over. The rod bent into an arc that made a sickening creak, but thanks to those superior materials and Lynn's alchemy, it refused to snap. He braced with both hands and began to fight the unseen behemoth below. "It's a big one, definitely a big one. It's coming up, Hermione, the net! Quick, the landing net." Hermione grabbed the net and moved to the water's edge, holding her breath to help. The lake roiled and a blurred, square shape rose to the surface. Hermione leaned over to look and went quiet, her expression frozen somewhere between disbelief and amusement. "What's wrong? Scoop it up. Don't let it get away," Lynn urged. Lynn," Hermione said slowly, standing and meeting him with an expression that said she was trying very hard to be kind. "Do you want to see exactly what you hooked?" Lynn followed her gaze. The thing they hauled into the net wasn't a fish at all, but a sodden, algae-encrusted old trunk, ancient-looking and utterly unimpressive. There was a long, awkward pause. "Ahem." Lynn cleared his throat a few times. "An accident. Purely an accident. You never know what you might find at the bottom of the Black Lake. But look at the fishing rod. It took that enormous pull and didn't break. That proves my alchemy worked." Hermione had to concede. She looked the rod over and admitted, "Well, the rod itself is very impressive." Back in the Hufflepuff dormitory, the same conversation replayed in a different key. William squinted at Lynn, who had returned empty-handed but far from defeated, and asked automatically, "Where's the fish?" Before Lynn could answer, William continued, "All right, never mind. I can tell from your face you didn't catch anything again." Lynn had no good excuse this time. A soggy trunk? No, so he pivoted, trying to reclaim some dignity as an alchemist. The fish aren't important. The process is what matters. Tell me, anything you want made, just say the word. I feel that with my current pinnacle and supernatural level of alchemy, there's nothing I can't make. He struck a dramatic pose. Really? Edgar leaped up, eyes shining. I want the latest Nimbus 2000. A flying broomstick. Ding, task issued. Craft a flying broomstick. Reward, sonic flight. Effect, after casting, you can fly at the speed of sound. Each casting is extremely physically taxing, very useful for running away. The task popped up at exactly the right moment. William immediately poured cold water on the idea. Wake up, Edgar. School rules say first years are not allowed to bring their own flying broomsticks. So what? Edgar shrugged. Lynn stroked his chin theatrically. As long as we don't get caught, it's fine. We can make it low profile. Disguise it as one of those old Cleansweep 7s they use in flying class. How's that? Brilliant, right? William thought for a moment, pushed his glasses up, and then nodded. An appearance disguise, that could work. Lynn, do you have enough alchemical materials? Making a broom is no small project. I have money, Lynn said. Ollie, usually quiet, spoke up calmly but firmly. I'll buy the materials. He was genuinely eager to help with the project and volunteered the funding. Lynn's face lit up. He slung an arm around Ollie's shoulder and flashed a grin that was half conspirator, half salesman. Perfect. I'll provide the technology. You provide the funding. We'll make a powerful alliance. It'll be worth it, trust me. Let's go big and go strong. I'll research the parts today and give you the material list tonight. Just wait. With that, Lynn bolted for the library. 27. The feeling of flying. In the Hufflepuff dormitory at night, Lynn solemnly handed Ollie a parchment list so long it dragged on the floor. Ollie took it, scanned it in silence, and passed it to William, who was peering over his shoulder. Walnut heartwood, mithril wire, unicorn tail hair, a small amount, augury feathers. William pushed up his glasses and frowned as he read on. Fundamentals of aerodynamics, principles of flight mechanics, analysis of internal structures of Muggle engines, introduction to automatic control theory. Lynn, what are these books for? We're making a broom, not an airplane. Lynn sounded certain. Making a broom is a lot like making a plane, isn't it? We should learn the principles. I don't know anything fancier than this, but the basics are the same. Both are about flight. William was skeptical. Are you sure these extremely scientific things will work in a world where things fly by magic? It can't hurt to try. Lynn shrugged. Knowledge is never wasted. Who knows what might spark? For him, it was as simple as triggering a few more times. Ollie didn't press the point. He nodded and sent a letter home with his owl, the long, strange list tucked inside. A few days later, a corner of the dormitory had been converted into Lynn's workshop. Blast! Protego! Boom! A muffled bang and a puff of black smoke rose from a pile of parts. William, Edgar, and Ollie poked their heads in from the doorway. William said flatly, Lynn, this is the third set of prototypes you've blown up. What? That can't be right. Lynn wiped grease off his face and scratched his messy bird's nest hair. According to his calculations, the compressed magic output structure should have handled the energy burst. Why had it overloaded and disintegrated again? He picked up several still-hot metal pieces and examined them. The main frame was fine. The trouble lay in the joints and the energy buffering components. The instantaneous impact force had exceeded the material's limits. Plainly put, things weren't fastened together well enough. Lynn dove back into the library. After flipping through 100 applications of the strong adhesive charm and guide to enhancing the toughness of magical materials, his eye caught a recipe for a super magical adhesive. He had a flash of inspiration and adapted it into structural reinforcement ribs for the engine's critical parts, fusing alchemy and charms into an improved formula. Then he read one ingredient and froze. Premium troll bogies. Refined. He hadn't noticed that ridiculous ingredient when he was improving the recipe. In a normal potion shop, it cost a fortune. Do I have to fleece Professor Snape again? Or pay a visit to a troll in the Forbidden Forest? He muttered, weighing the options. In the end, he sighed and decided to downgrade the design, lower the engine's power for stability, and save the high-performance version for when he could find the ingredients or get richer. After repeated adjustments, tests, and a few more small explosions, a pleasant chime sounded through the dormitory. Ding! Task completed. Rewards have been issued. On the table lay a broom that, at a glance, looked almost identical to the old Cleansweep 7 models in the school storeroom. Dull color, uneven twigs, deceptively ordinary. Don't be fooled by its shabby looks, Lynn said, patting the handle like a proud parent. But it's definitely better than a Nimbus 2000. He launched into his sales pitch. First, speed. I lowered the power for stability, but it's still a tad faster than a Nimbus 2000. Second, safety. It has a built-in sensory array that monitors the surroundings in real time. When it predicts you're about to crash into a wall, the ground, or anything else, it will automatically brake hard. You can turn that off if you find it annoying. And the anti-theft system. Lynn motioned for Edgar to try it. Mount it and take off. Edgar eagerly straddled the broom and shouted, "Up!" But the broom didn't move. Lynn grinned and snapped his fingers. See, it supports fingerprint and facial recognition binding. He gripped the handle. The broom hummed and hovered. If it's not bound to the person, no one can steal it. That's so cool, the three of them said in unison. Lynn waved them on. One more feature, appearance switching. Even though we first years can't have personal brooms yet, looking cool is forever. It can switch between 3 preset skins, including this Cleansweep 7 look. They couldn't wait to test it. To the Quidditch pitch. The pitch was empty for reasons unknown. Lynn handed them dragon-hide gloves, goggles-equipped helmets, and various other protective gear. Edgar, William, and Ollie exchanged looks at the heavy kit. Do we really have to wear all this? Edgar complained. Of course, Lynn said firm. I've only fully tested it once. There could be surprises. Safety first. I don't want to be expelled tomorrow for illegally modifying a broom and causing serious injury to a classmate. Geared up, Edgar mounted the broom. Rise. The broom lifted smoothly and hovered. With a soft rush, it blurred into motion, darting across the sky above the Quidditch pitch. Wahoo! This is amazing. The speed, the stability. Edgar whooped, wind whistling past. Fortunately, the pitch was empty. If anyone had seen them, the professors would probably dock Hufflepuff's house points until next year. 28. Today is a good day. Today was a joyous day. Not even Professor Quirrell's extracurricular tutoring, with that persistent smell of garlic clinging to his sleeves, could dampen Lynn's mood. As soon as class ended, he did something he'd never done before. Instead of rushing to the Black Lake for his usual Air Force ceremony, he darted straight back to the Hufflepuff dormitory. How is it? How is it? Has it hatched? Any movement? He panted, practically bursting through the door. William Smith pushed his glasses up and pointed at the table. It hasn't fully emerged yet, but the cracks are spreading. It looks like it'll be any minute. Edgar and Ollie were gathered there too, faces taut with the same nervous excitement. Lynn lunged forward, eyes fixed on the golden-red egg in the middle of the table. As if in answer to his gaze, the shell made a faint, crisp cracking sound, and the fissures spidered outward. A hum swelled from the egg. The ambient magic in the dormitory strained toward the breaking shell. You could actually see vortices of magic twisting in the air, causing papers and books to flutter. Golden-red light bled through the cracks until the whole room was lit as if a tiny sun had been set afire on the table. Chime! A clear, crystalline voice rang out from the center of the radiance. Ding! Successfully hatched creature, Phoenix variant. When the notification faded, the light softened, and the creature in the middle became visible to all 4 of them. It held itself with effortless grace. Its feathers shifted between gold and red like living flame. Its head was bird-like and dignified, its beak sleek and curved. Its neck was long and sinuous. The curve of its back suggested solidity like a tortoise's shell. Its tail spread out like a magnificent fish's fin, trailing specks of starlight. It was nothing like the phoenixes in Western legend. Lynn met the newborn's eyes. The bird cocked its head, examined him, and then, with a clear, dependent voice that echoed directly in his ears, said, Master. Lynn almost floated. His heart swelled. Every potion brewed, every trip into the Forbidden Forest for materials, even the points Snape had docked him, felt instantly justified. William, for once at a loss for words, stammered, What kind of creature is this? He searched his memory frantically, and realized no known magical species matched it. Edgar and Ollie were equally dumbstruck, staring with mouths agape. "It told me it's a phoenix," Lynn said, forcing his voice to stay calm, though a grin betrayed him. William adjusted his sliding spectacles and fumbled for comparison. But compared to the descriptions in Fantastic Beasts and where Professor Dumbledore's fox, different regions, different varieties, Lynn cut in, half explaining, half bragging. Maybe it's a local variant. He knew, though, that variant was an understatement. The list of skills the system spat into his head made his breath catch. Eternal Ember can be reborn even if its body and soul are destroyed. Star Vortex Fire. Wings release star vortices. Flames generate a powerful gravitational field capable of warping space and teleporting. Frozen Frost seals living beings or objects. Light Harmonic Chord. Feathers act like strings to weave light barriers, create illusions, heal allies, and suppress healing for enemies. Feather Beacon. Use a feather as a beacon. The phoenix can teleport to your side regardless of distance or teleport you to it. Heart Flame Communion. Establish a lifelink with a creature for a set time, sharing vitality. Injuries are shared. If the phoenix dies during this period, it is reborn within its contractor's body. Anthem of Purification. Sings to dispel undead, purify evil spirits, lift curses, and restore polluted land and water. Seed of Nirvana. Each rebirth produces a golden seed. Planted inside a dying or recently deceased creature. Success heals all wounds. Failure causes instant death. Lynn looked at that absurdly powerful list and then at his own meager little spells like Tongue Twister and Torrential Impact. A complicated mix of pride and disbelief flooded him. Is this a pet? He thought. This is basically a max-level veteran rolling a new character to start over. There's no comparison. Master! The bird's clear voice chimed again as it fluttered up and circled Lynn, sprinkling warm motes of light. You haven't given me a name yet. Lynn thought of the phoenix's elegance and of the old legends, a phoenix that represents peace and auspiciousness. Wuan, he said, offering a finger. The phoenix alighted and nuzzled it. I'll call you Wuan. Do you like it? A joyful chirp answered him. Wuan flew back to the table and preened her tail feathers with a satisfied, elegant motion. Whatever Master says. Why? Why does it get a poetic name like Wuan? Why do I have to be called Old 8? Protest. I formally protest. I want to change my name too. Lynn laughed. All right, Old 8, pipe down. He took from his trunk the pile of potions he'd brewed earlier, bottles of nourishing fluid meant for young magical creatures, and held them out. Drink up. Wu An glanced between the vials and her own small size and made a disdainful chirp. Master, you don't even feed pigs like this. Then take it slowly. It can't be wasted, Lynn said, watching with a fatherly smile as Wu An sipped daintily from a bottle. His smile faded a little as practicality intruded. Where would he raise Wu An? The phoenix was powerful, but newly hatched and barely bigger than a rooster. He would be dangerous to keep in the Forbidden Forest. That would be like throwing his child to the wolves. Keeping her in the dormitory was risky too. Visitors could appear at any time. If anyone saw a phoenix unlike Fox, the questions and attention would be endless. He glanced around the room, and his eyes landed on the unremarkable-looking trunk in the corner, his undetectable extension trunk. Newt Scamander's famous suitcase came to mind, a portable menagerie that could simulate ecosystems and hold whole creatures. He walked over, patted its hard exterior, and looked at Wuan as she elegantly preened on the table. This is doable, he said, and Wuan chirped approvingly. Chapter 29. Luggage Modification. No sooner said than done. Lynn rolled up his sleeves and stood before what looked like an ordinary trunk. Fortunately, while he'd been loitering in the restricted section earlier, he'd already managed to engrave the undetectable extension charm, a spell strictly regulated by the Ministry of Magic. The restricted section really was useful, he thought smugly as he waved his wand. You could even find contraband spells there. He began working on the trunk. One complex charm after another seeped into the wood with his incantations. Lynn didn't just want to expand the internal space. He wanted to reshape the spatial structure, form the terrain, stabilize light sources, and even attempt a simple elemental cycle. Expand, stabilize terrain shaping, constant light and shadow, he muttered, the light at his wand tip flickering as subtle ripples formed in the air around the trunk. Edgar, William, and Ollie, who had been watching Wuan sip nutrient solution nearby, kept glancing over, their faces full of question marks as Lynn fussed over a box. "Lynn, what are you doing, mumbling and poking at that thing?" Edgar finally asked, leaning in. "Oh, it's nothing," Lynn said without looking up, continuing his work. "I'm using the undetectable extension charm to make a home for Wuan inside the trunk. If the space is bigger, it'll be more comfortable." The undetectable extension charm. William's eyes widened behind his glasses. "You use the undetectable extension charm? Do you have permission from the ministry? That's strictly regulated." Lynn paused and shrugged. "It's not a violation if you don't get caught. What, you going to report me?" "Of course not," the three replied in unison. William scowled like he was trying to look serious, but he shook his head anyway. "Fine then." Grinning, Lynn went back to work. He suddenly remembered something and called to Wuan, who was taking small sips of the nutrient solution. "Wuan, do me a favor. Fly to the owlery and fetch Lao Ba. He's a snowy owl and speaks with a pretty strong Dongbei accent. You'll know it when you hear it." "Okay, master," Wuan answered obediently, spreading its still youthful but oddly mystical wings. The space around it distorted, rippled like water, and in the next moment it vanished into thin air, leaving behind a few gold-red light particles that slowly dissipated. "Whoa," Edgar marveled. "It just teleported away?" Wuan wasn't very practiced yet, Lynn noted, which explained the spatial ripples. Satisfied, he invited his three roommates in. "The inside of the trunk is basically ready. Want to take a look? Fair warning, it's pretty big, so don't freak out." "Yes," they chorused, curiosity fully piqued. Lynn opened the lid and gestured for them to enter. Edgar, William, and Ollie climbed in one by one, and then all three gasped. It wasn't a storage compartment at all, but a vast grassland. The lid no longer read as a ceiling, but as a simulated sky that gave off a soft glow. There were no actual clouds or sun yet, but the light was even and ample. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of grass and soil, not a hint of stuffiness. "Merlin, this area, this grassland." Edgar spun around, ecstatic. "How big is this place?" Lynn jumped in behind them, pride in his voice. "Not huge, about the size of a standard football field." Compared to Newt Scamander's legendary suitcase, which held snowy mountains and rainforests, Lynn's creation was modest, more like a shell house, but as a start, it was staggering. He already planned to plant a tall sycamore in the center for Wuan, with a small, comfortable villa nearby for himself. He could imagine drifting in for a vacation sometimes, maybe keeping a few more magical creatures. Just as they were coming out of the trunk and getting their bearings, wing beats sounded outside the window and a familiar, loud voice called in a thick Dongbei accent. "Oh my goodness, big brother! That fancy little bird dragged me over in such a hurry." "What's up?" Lao Ba had never properly called Lynn master. The snowy owl had once called him biped, and Big Brother was apparently a major improvement. Lynn opened the window and let Lao Ba fly in to land on the back of a chair. "I'm writing a letter. Take it to Hogsmeade, Magical Building Materials and Rare Woods Shop. Yes, that one." He unfurled a piece of parchment and wrote a short note ordering treated, sturdy wood and stone for the house, and most importantly, a sycamore sapling or seed for Wuan's future home. He tied the letter to Lao Ba's thick leg along with a small pouch of galleons, one of the few bits of savings he had left. "Go and come back quickly, Lao Ba. Don't play around, and don't pick fights with other owls," Lynn warned. I know, nagging like my mother." Lao Ba grumbled, spread his wings, and whooshed out the window. With the trunk modification finished and Wuan settled, a lazy emptiness washed over Lynn. William was absorbed in a book. Edgar was lovingly polishing a cleansweep broom. He couldn't use it openly at school, but he didn't need to. To look at it made him happy. And Ollie was quietly writing a letter home. "Sigh, I'm bored," Lynn muttered, stretching. Fishing? He didn't want to face the Black Lake just yet. Alchemy? He didn't have the coins. A stroll through the Forbidden Forest? Too lazy. Then he remembered his vegetable patch, the strawberries he'd planted. Since the Ravenclaw volunteers had helped clear the land and he had planted the strawberries, he had barely checked on them, instead trusting Hagrid to keep an eye on the patch. He wondered how they were doing. He walked out of the castle toward the experimental field next to Hagrid's pumpkin patch and stopped short. These are my strawberries?" He rubbed his eyes as if under a confundus. The patch, once only loosened soil, now held neat rows of robust seedlings. Most of the plants had already sprouted several true leaves. Lynn knew this variety usually took 5 to 10 weeks from germination to true leaves, and it had been less than 4 weeks. The bountiful harvest talent truly does not deceive, he thought, kneeling to touch a tender green leaf. This growth rate was startling, practically a high-speed train. By his original plan, he might have harvested by the end of term. At this rate, forget that. He might have his first batch of large, sweet strawberries by Christmas. 30. Pretending to be young. Time passed slowly as Lynn filled his days with classes, endless tinkering on his 19, studying the dark arts with Professor Quirrell, and playing Air Force Commander by the Black Lake. One afternoon after Charms, feeling a little restless, he wandered the castle. He climbed a spiral staircase without realizing it and found himself on the 8th floor. It was much quieter up here. The tapestries along the corridor watched everything in silence. As he rounded a corner, he heard the faint murmur of a conversation, deliberately hushed. "Here, surely no one will come, right?" a girl asked, her voice nervous. "Don't worry, Clearwater, hardly anyone comes up here. It's very secluded," a boy replied, his tone lowered but with a faint edge of tension. Lynn froze, ears alert. Something was happening. A grin of discovery spread across his face. He pressed himself against the wall and peered cautiously around the corner. Not far ahead, a red-haired boy paced in front of a tapestry showing growth, 26 clubbing Barnabas the Barmy, looking anxious. Beside him stood a Ravenclaw girl. Lynn wondered what they might do to the tapestry when, after the boy paced back and forth 3 times, the blank stretch of wall rippled like water and a smooth wooden door slid silently out of it. "Oh?" Lynn's eyes lit up. "This place is interesting." Seeing the two about to push the door open, he stepped out from his hiding place with an innocent, sunny smile and called, "Hello, seniors." The sudden voice startled them. Percy spun, panic momentarily on his face. He adjusted his glasses and tried to compose himself. "Oh, hello, you are?" Penelope's cheeks flushed crimson. She looked as if she wished the floor would swallow her. Only when Lynn stepped fully into view did he see who they were. Delighted inwardly, but he kept up an air of unaffected naivete. "Hi, I'm Lynn, a first year in Hufflepuff." He let his gaze accidentally drift to the newly appeared door and tilted his head in feigned puzzlement. "Huh? That door? I don't remember it being here before. Did the castle make it appear? Never mind." He smiled even more brightly. "Seniors, are you here for something?" Percy's heart leapt. Fearing Lynn would ask why they were here, he hurried to change the subject in his most authoritative prefect tone. "Oh, that's the Room of Requirement. It's very magical. You probably haven't seen it before." "The Room of Requirement?" Lynn's eyes sparkled with curiosity. "Can it really become whatever you need?" Relieved that Lynn was focused on the room's magic and not on the reason for their meeting, Percy rattled off the mechanics. "Concentrate on what you need, walk past the tapestry 3 times, speaking as if quoting from a textbook." Lynn responded with a look of sudden enlightenment. "Ah, so that's how it works. Hogwarts really is magical, to have a room that makes wishes come true." Having extracted the information he wanted, and seeing the pair still flustered, Lynn's mischief was satisfied. He waved cheerfully at them and put on an even more innocent smile. "Thanks for telling me about such an interesting place. I won't disturb your, exploration of the 24's secrets. Goodbye, seniors." Then, hands in his pockets and humming a tuneless little tune, he strolled away down the corridor, pretending he had just happened to pass by. In truth, he felt a little foolish. Playing the innocent child didn't quite suit him, but the tactic had worked. Percy and Penelope were left by the newly revealed door, cheeks still hot, exchanging embarrassed looks. Percy inwardly wailed, "Merlin's lace camisole. How did I end up bumping into a Hufflepuff first year?" He didn't see anything, did he? Lynn dashed back to the Hufflepuff dormitories like a whirlwind, grinning as if he had discovered a new world. "Guess what I found in the 24?" he burst out. William, buried in a study of variant rune structures, didn't look up. "What? Another broken boot dredged from the Black Lake, or did your 7 finally stop exploding?" "Much better." Lynn slapped his hand over William's book and practically vibrated with excitement. "A magical room, A room that becomes whatever you want, like it's alive. For real? Edgar, spinning a quill on his guy, flipped up from his bed with wide eyes. It becomes whatever you want, even a Quidditch pitch. Why would I lie? Lynn said solemnly. I saw Percy Weasley and Penelope Clearwater use it. They made a room, though there might still be people inside now. Tonight, I'll take you. At last, late that night, the Hufflepuff Night Tour squad assembled. They wore a shabby 14. Lynn had modified from an old robe to blur outlines, or else bungled disillusionment charms. Tonight's goal, find the room of requirement. The 8th floor corridor was silent, moonlight cold through the high windows. Edgar, nervous and excited, whispered, Lynn, are you sure this is the right place? Where is it? Shh! Lynn, walking ahead as a shadow among shadows, canceled his disillusionment charm and turned back to hush them. Be quiet. Do you want Filch to hear us? We're almost there. See that tapestry of the 26 clubbing the fool? It's opposite that. The group tiptoed to the blank stretch of wall across from the tapestry. 31. House of Requirement. Listen. Lynn lowered his voice. It's simple. Picture the room you want as clearly as you can, then walk back and forth 3 times in front of this stretch of wall. Keep your thoughts focused, he added. Edgar was first to try. He shut his eyes, his face soft with longing, murmuring, I want a room full of every broom I could ever ride. He paced back and forth 3 times exactly as Lynn had said. On his 3rd turn, a door silently formed in the smooth stone wall. Merlin's beard, Edgar cried, shoving the door open. Inside was a vast space like a Quidditch equipment storeroom, shelves and racks piled with broomsticks from antique Portsmouth comets to the latest Nimbus 2000s. Edgar whooped and lunged for the coolest-looking broom. William stepped up next. He concentrated plainly. I want a quiet library with shelves full of books, especially on ancient runes and advanced transfiguration. After 3 laps, a door appeared. Beyond it, floor-to-ceiling bookcases groaned under heavy tomes. The air smelled of dust and old parchment. William nodded with satisfaction. Ollie hesitated, then spoke softly. I want a place where I can see the stars, somewhere quiet to be alone. The door appeared again, revealing a terrace under a brilliant, magical night sky. A gentle breeze ruffled the air, and a single comfortable lounge chair sat in a corner. Ollie's eyes brightened, and he stepped inside. Watching them, Lynn felt playful. He tried a few of his own. A laboratory with the most complete set of tools and a stable fireproof protective circle, a simulated fishing pond that could recreate famous spots around the world, and a lazy person's paradise piled with cushions and snacks. They wandered through more than a dozen rooms, testing out different functions and pleasures. Eventually, the 4 of them settled into Lynn's lazy man's paradise, sinking into soft cushions and nibbling on so-so snacks that had appeared out of thin air. Edgar belched contentedly. Fantastic! This place is just paradise! William adjusted his glasses. The functionality is incredible. It can meet practically any immediate spatial need. The room of requirement's magical mechanisms are unfathomable. Ollie nodded silently. Lynn smacked his lips and offered his verdict. Overall, not bad. It's more comprehensive than my portable hideout. You get whatever you can imagine. But, he drawled, it's not as convenient as my portable hideout. This thing can't be carried. Every time you want to use it, you have to run to the 8th floor and walk 3 steps like an idiot in front of a wall. It's not subtle, and it doesn't fit my style. My portable hideout is still better. It's rough around the edges now, but it's private and mobile. It has a lot more potential. Lynn's assessment was as stubborn and picky as ever. All right, time to head back. We have potions tomorrow. If Snape sees us with dark circles under our eyes, he'll treat us like ingredients for his potions. William rubbed his tired eyes and was the first to suggest leaving. Exploring the room of requirement had been thrilling but exhausting. Edgar lingered to give the Nimbus 2000 one last caress, still reluctant to leave, while Ollie quietly rose from the terrace chair. They pulled on Lynn's low-quality version of an invisibility cloak. The cloak's flaws weren't entirely Lynn's fault. Funds had been tight lately. Most of their galleons had gone into renovating Lynn's portable hideout and into Wu An's project, so there was barely anything left for cloak materials. Being able to produce a shoddy camouflage that would only confuse the eye in dim light was already a triumph of what Lynn called primal resonance. Lynn insisted this was not stinginess, it was cost-cutting and efficiency. Huddled together under the cloak, the three of them crept along the corridor. Lynn led, the disillusionment charm still active, and Peter's jolt, his makeshift danger detector, never turned off, acting like a living radar. "Turn left, stay close to the wall," he whispered. They flattened themselves against the cold stone like geckos. Professor McGonagall turned the corner in the side corridor, her stern figure scanning the shadows. Her sharp gaze lingered on their hiding place for a few seconds before she continued on. The four under the cloak dared not breathe. Just when they started to relax, Lynn froze and signaled them down again. Filch appeared, lugging his dim oil lamp and muttering about which suits of armor needed oiling. Madame Norris padded at his heels, her bulbous eyes gleaming and her nose twitching as if she could smell the unfamiliar fabric. They held their breath until the footsteps faded. Then they nearly ran straight into Peeves, making his usual racket on the stairs. Lynn picked up Peeves' peculiar chaotic aura in time and gave the warning. They dove into a broom cupboard niche and listened to Peeves float past, humming an off-key prank song. Guided by Lynn's warnings, they slipped through the layers of patrols without mishap and finally reached the familiar stack of barrels that led to the Hufflepuff common room. After tapping a specific rhythm, the barrel lid swung open. They filed in one by one and crawled into the warm, empty common room, where only the embers in the fireplace glowed faintly. They peeled off the damp, sweat-soaked cloak and sighed with relief. "Merlin, every time I go out at night with Lynn, it feels like sneaking through a war," Edgar admitted as he flopped into the nearest armchair. "But worth it, right?" he added weakly. William, exhausted but satisfied, tonight's discoveries would keep him reminiscing for a long time. Ollie nodded, his eyes bright with contentment. Lynn stuffed the cloak into his portable hideout and yawned. "All right, warriors, get some rest. We have to face Snape's care tomorrow. I hope he doesn't find out we poked around the Room of Requirements' more unauthorized rooms last night." With tired excitement and the promise of tomorrow still tugging at them, the Hufflepuff Night Stroll Squad disbanded. One by one, they crept back into their warm beds. 32. Where are the giants in the castle? Tonight, the Great Hall looked different from any ordinary evening at Hogwarts. A mischievous, cheerful Halloween spirit hung in the air. Enchanted bats, Lynn privately thought they looked a lot like tiny flapping snapes, swept in lazy circles beneath the ceiling. Jack-o'-lanterns with toothy grins drifted in midair, candles inside their carved faces guttering warm light. Small clusters of low, dark clouds hovered above each house table, spitting a cool, gentle rain that kept the hall from getting stuffy. The smell of food was richer than usual. Roasted meat, steaming pumpkin pie, and a sugary tide of candies that made mouths water. No one was excused from classes for Halloween, of course, though the festive mood lightened most lessons. Everything except Professor Snape's potions, that is. That morning, Lynn had been in Professor McGonagall's Transfiguration class. The assignment fit the season: turn a thick wooden board into a jack-o'-lantern. With his Transfiguration mastery, Lynn finished the task almost as soon as McGonagall had demonstrated. He flicked his wand, spoke the words, and the board twisted and bulged into a perfect pumpkin face, a candle flaring to life inside. "I have seen your talent more than once, Mr. Lynn," McGonagall said, a barely noticeable note of approval softening her stern features. 5 points to Hufflepuff for excellent and prompt work. Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs in the class were used to it. The moment the lesson began, Lynn's hand was already up to indicate completion. It barely raised an eyebrow. That evening, the students filed back into the newly decorated Great Hall under their prefect's lead. The tables groaned under Halloween specialties. After everyone was seated, Headmaster Dumbledore stood and gave a very short speech. Lynn felt a pang of gratitude. Compared to leaders he'd known in another life who could ramble on for half an hour, this was blissfully brief. "Now," Dumbledore swept his gaze across the hall and smiled. "Dig in." Lynn inwardly cheered. Short speeches were the best. He reached for a plate of fragrant beef stew. He loved beef, and the smell sent his thoughts to a holiday dish from his previous life, Yanma beef, which he planned to try recreating and preserving with a charm when he had time. Just as his fork neared the stew, a cold little ping sounded in his mind. The system notification. Quest issued. Collect a sample of fresh troll snot. Reward, tempered body. After casting, your physical strength, endurance, energy, and mana recovery speed will receive a comprehensive and significant boost for 1 hour. After the effect ends, you will enter a weakened state for 1 hour. Want to be a humanoid troll for an hour? Wish granted. Lynn froze, fork hovering. Trolls? Snot? The system had to be joking. Where was he supposed to get troll snot at a school? Before he could decide whether this was a prank, the great hall doors burst open with a bang. Professor Quirrell stumbled in, pale, his turban crooked, terror written all over him. Troll in the castle, he blurted, voice trembling. Then his knees buckled, and he collapsed at the doorway. Pandemonium erupted, screams, chairs scraping, 100 panicked voices filling the hall like a single rising wave. Dumbledore's voice boomed, cutting through the chaos. Silence! Prefects shouted orders, shepherding students toward the exits and back to their common rooms. Taking advantage of the confusion, Lynn slipped away from the Hufflepuff line like an eel, melting into a corridor. Instead of fear, he felt a thrill. Let's see where the troll delivering snot is hiding, he muttered. He planted himself on a landing and used Peter's Jolt, the danger sense ability, like a human radar. Upstairs, nothing. Downstairs, aha! A ping of danger came from below. Found you, he grinned and darted toward the lower floors. What others might call a survival instinct, Lynn treated as a navigation tool. Even if things went wrong, he had options. Wuan's feather for spatial teleportation, the blessing of the Hogwarts white flower to keep him alive if badly injured. He knew his limits well enough to be confident he wouldn't be killed by a troll. Guided by the needle-true pull of Peter's Jolt, he moved quickly through empty corridors toward the dungeons. Before he saw it, an oppressive, revolting stench hit him. Old socks, rotting cabbage, and swamp mud combined into a single, physical force that made him reel. It was far worse than the garlic in Quirrell's office. He gagged and snapped off a bubblehead charm around his head. Merlin's smelly socks, he muttered. Maybe the reward isn't worth it. The doubt lasted only a moment. Heavy footsteps thudded ahead, and a guttural, stupid roar rolled through the corridor. Smash! The sound shook the stones. The stench intensified with each step. Then, rounding the corner and filling the shadowed end of the passage, a vast, terrible shape loomed into view. Massive, reeking, and radiating danger. 33. Are you convinced? It was a behemoth, almost 12 feet tall. Its skin was dull and rough like granite, bumpy with boils and filth. Its head was a bald, lumpy stone, pathetically small and hopelessly out of proportion to the rest of its body. A pair of dull, tiny eyes were sunk deep in its brow, flickering with a stupid light. Its arms hung almost to the ground. One hand gripped a wooden club that looked ripped straight from some ancient tree and swung it aimlessly, smashing the nearby walls and sending stone chips flying. With every step, the ground trembled. Those giant feet thudded on the floor with a dull, bone-rattling beat. Slimy, foul-smelling drool oozed constantly from its thick lips. Lynn's gaze was locked on the two glistening blobs of snot swaying with the troll's movements. The target was right there. To hell with everything else. Cast the spell first, worry later. Petrificus totalis, he waved his wand without hesitation. The spell struck true. The troll's massive body stiffened, its movements thick and sluggish as if it had stepped into treacle, though it didn't freeze completely. Its dull eyes rolled and finally fixed on the tiny speck at the end of the corridor that had dared provoke it. Stupid, die! The troll cursed in its limited vocabulary, roared and charged, swinging the club. The club scraped the wall, tearing off a chunk of stone. Lynn's temper flared. Damn it! You smell like a jar of salted fish that's been pickled for 10 years, and you dare to curse at me. Who do you think you are? He ducked the sweeping blow nimbly and raised his wand again. Reducto, torrential impact. Boom. The spells hit the troll's thick chest. The reducto ripped into flesh instead of bone. No fatal wound, but it gushed filth and blood. The torrential impact slammed into the wound like a sledgehammer of water, the force knocking the creature off balance. With a thunderous crash, it fell on its back, sending the corridor trembling. If not for the fact he wanted that disgusting snot intact, and he didn't want the commotion to attract professors, Lynn thought, he'd have aimed for that pitiful little head. Still want to fight? Stay down! The troll scrambled, furious and bewildered, trying to get up. Lynn pointed his wand and tried a final admonition. Revenge! Die! The troll didn't understand persuasion. Pain and anger only made it more frantic. It writhed on the floor and kept trying to get to its feet. Sighing as if the creature had forced his hand, Lynn's eyes sharpened. Sectum Sempra, Stupefy. Two spells almost simultaneously. The blade slice grazed the troll's not very big nose and sheared it off at the root. At the same time, the red light of the stunning spell vanished into its gaping mouth. The troll's bulk convulsed, then went utterly limp. See? I'm so kind. I even gave you an anesthetic so you wouldn't feel the pain. He looked down at the noseless, ugly face and commented with no pretense of sympathy. Ding! Mission complete. Reward tempered has been issued. Suppressing a wave of nausea, Lynn transfigured a glass bottle and a pair of tongs. Carefully holding his breath, he collected the severed nose and the fresh troll snot clinging to it and quickly sealed the bottle. He glanced once at the unconscious troll, then turned without hesitation and fled the biochemical contamination zone, sprinting back toward the Hufflepuff common room. Lynn, where on earth did you go? We were worried sick. If Wuan hadn't used his wings to stop us and signaled for us to keep quiet, we'd have reported you missing to the professors. He had barely squeezed through the dormitory door before his three roommates flocked around him, eyes anxious and reproachful. Edgar even grabbed his arm. Lynn felt a small warmth at the concern, but his face stayed nonchalant. He shook the glass bottle containing the unspeakable prize and gave a casual laugh. It's nothing. I just took advantage of the chaos to have a friendly chat with a lost troll in the castle and happened to collect some of its snot. Under the three stupefied faces, Lynn began to tell the tale, predictably, with a fair amount of artistic license. He painted himself as heroic and fearless, wise and brave in the face of the troll, easily taking it down with a perfect sequence of spells and risking everything to secure the quest item. The stench and his first instinct to back away were reframed as strategic avoidance of olfactory interference. Edgar's eyes shone as he listened. William wore a skeptical, I'll believe it when pigs fly look, but he was drawn in anyway. Ollie slid his chair back, keeping a polite distance from the bottle. Meanwhile, on another floor of the castle, the atmosphere in a girl's bathroom was heavy and charged. Headmaster Dumbledore, Professor McGonagall, Professor Flitwick, Professor Sprout, and Professor Snape, paler than usual and favoring his left leg, stood around the massive, lifeless troll in the center of the room. Their gazes then swept to the three terrified Gryffindor first-years, Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, and Hermione Granger. The professor's eyes were immediately drawn to the troll's most striking wound. Its nose was missing. The creature's vitality and natural resistance were ridiculous. Despite being felled earlier, it had somehow come to and crawled along on instinct until it found the three in the bathroom. It had chosen the wrong targets for revenge, but given its intelligence, that was hardly surprising. Professor McGonagall's voice was tight with anger and disbelief. Potter, Weasley, Miss Granger, explain exactly what happened here. Why were you in this bathroom, and how did this troll come to be like this? Her gaze lingered especially on Harry and Ron. The three spoke at once, tumbling out the story, the troll's sudden entrance, their efforts to subdue it, and how Ron, in desperation, had used a levitation charm to seize control of the troll's club and knock it unconscious. As the professors listened, their brows grew heavier. The other marks on the troll corresponded to the students' descriptions, club blows, blunt force trauma, but the missing nose, sliced off with an almost surgical smoothness, didn't fit the rest. Dumbledore's blue eyes behind his half-moon spectacles went deep and thoughtful as he slowly turned his gaze toward Snape, who had been standing silent at the side, emanating that familiar low-pressure aura. Dumbledore's gaze flicked to Snape, asking a question with nothing more than a look. Severus, this incision, I know you've researched unusual cutting spells bordering on the dark arts. Did you happen to take that troll's nose for some rare potion ingredient? Snape felt the stare and tipped his chin a fraction, so slight it might have been missed. But the meaning was plain. Not me. I have no interest in the mucus of that filthy beast, much less in acquiring it this way. While that silent exchange passed between the two professors, Professor Quirrell came skittering into the bathroom, breathless and muttering, "Merlin, oh Merlin," all wide-eyed panic and discomposure. Dumbledore's attention moved from Snape back to the three shaken students and the oddly mutilated troll. A nose removed with surgical precision, Halloween was turning out to be far more interesting than expected. Someone in the castle had clearly learned some alarming magic. Meanwhile, Lynn had returned to his dormitory, quietly pleased with his new skill and with a jar of troll mucus to boot. The next morning, the story of Harry and two others bringing down a troll spread through Hogwarts like wildfire. The versions became increasingly ridiculous. At one point, someone claimed Harry had stared it to death. Lynn sat in the Great Hall, eating, listening with mild surprise. He'd assumed the noseless oaf would be left unconscious in the corridor until a passing professor tidied things up. Given that Hermione and the others had run into the troll after he'd already weakened and bled it wasn't hard to believe they could finish it, especially with Hermione's brains. If they couldn't, after all that carving and bloodshed, their spells would really have been learned in vain. He mentally critiqued their tactics over bacon when a familiar voice called behind him. "Lynn," he froze. That sound. He turned. "Fawkes? What are you doing here?" It was a little odd to see a phoenix wandering the Great Hall so casually. Fawkes didn't answer in words. Instead, the bird regarded him and then extended a claw. Before Lynn could think, he reached out. The world swirled. Warm light and golden flames engulfed him, and in an instant, he was sitting before Dumbledore's great desk. The headmaster regarded him with gentle blue eyes behind half-moon spectacles and offered a small smile. "Oh, Mr. Lynn, you're here. Please sit." Lynn kept his face carefully blank, just a touch of confusion and obedient attention. From the moment he'd used Sectum Sempra to take the troll's nose, he'd expected this. He sounded composed. "Professor, did you need to see me?" Inside, he felt as steady as an old hound. He had his reasons, saving money on glue, and he hadn't meant to kill the troll. At worst, it would be lost house points and detention. He could handle that. Dumbledore's tone was calm but direct. "Mr. Lynn, a small question, and I'd like a truthful answer. That spell you used, the one that causes such an extremely sharp cutting effect, Sectum Sempra, where did you learn it?" Dumbledore had already learned from Madame Pince that Lynn had a restricted section pass signed by Professor Quirrell. That gave him a line to follow. Lynn answered plainly. "Professor Quirrell taught me." There was no point lying. Quirrell had indeed shown him the spell. Dumbledore's brow tightened ever so slightly, but his voice stayed even. "Besides this dangerous spell, what other, similar magic have you learned from Professor Quirrell?" Lynn began to count off on his fingers as if naming items on a menu. Fear charm, shadow binding curse, bone breaking curse, blood boiling curse, acid curse. With each dark art's name, Dumbledore's fingers curled a little on the armrest and one eyelid twitched. His thoughts flashed hot and private. That man can teach. But what puzzled him was the boy sitting calmly before him. There were none of the pallor, irritability, or slow paranoia Dumbledore would expect from exposure to such curses. Lynn looked absurdly healthy. "All right, Mr. Lynn, I think I have the general idea." Dumbledore cut him off before the list went any further and steered the conversation. "Then tell me, why did you remove that troll's nose?" This was the part he truly could not understand. The brutality of it lacked any obvious motive. Lynn's answer, delivered with the simple sincerity of someone used to being economical, nearly undid Dumbledore. "I needed the troll mucus to brew superglue, Professor. The premium troll mucus at the magical supplies in Hogsmeade is ridiculously expensive. I couldn't afford it, so I took matters into my own hands." Dumbledore went silent. The expression on Lynn's face, a perfectly ordinary practical look, made the headmaster hang between amusement and incredulity. The reason was utterly prosaic. After a pause, he made one final, careful request. "Mr. Lynn, I've noticed you've learned quite a few rather risky spells. May I perform a simple examination? The effects of the dark arts on a practitioner are not something to take lightly." "Of course, Professor." Lynn didn't hesitate. He even offered his wrist before Dumbledore asked. He trusted his only eat the sugar coating, his private belief that nothing would go wrong. Dumbledore waved his wand and a soft golden light wrapped around Lynn. He probed the flow of magic, the fluctuations of mind, the state of the boy's soul. Once again, he was surprised. Lynn's magic was pure and steady, his mental barriers intact, his soul lively and untainted. There were no signs of erosion by the dark arts. He might have made a model of a healthy Hogwarts student. When Dumbledore withdrew the light, he wore a helpless little smile. He saw that, practically speaking, he could allow the boy to continue his dubious lessons, at least for now, because there was no sign of harm. Still, he could not let it pass without warning. Mr. Lynn, you have a considerable aptitude for learning, but these spells are dangerous, not only to others but sometimes to the caster as well. They can have unpredictable effects. Use them with extreme caution, and unless absolutely necessary, refrain from using them. Lynn inclined his head like a sparrow pecking at seed, earnest and obedient. I understand, Professor. I'll remember and only use them in a critical moment. He smiled inwardly, though. No side effects, he thought. It would be a shame not to use them. He'd judge when it was worth it and act accordingly. 35. Big Glutton. When Lynn returned to the entrance of the Great Hall, the students who had been waiting there swarmed him at once. Lynn, why did Dumbledore's Phoenix come looking for you? Did you get into big trouble? What did the headmaster say? Lynn laughed and used the excuse he'd prepared earlier. Nothing serious. The headmaster was just checking on my studies and asking if I had any suggestions about teaching at Hogwarts. He probably thinks we Hufflepuffs are observant types. Ha! Class is about to start. Move along. The ripple from the troll incident had already died down, replaced by a new topic. The annual Quidditch season had officially begun. Lynn, wake up! Don't you have extracurricular tutoring with Professor Quirrell this morning? Edgar demanded, giving Lynn a mound of blankets like a cocoon, a hard shove. Lynn mumbled in his sleep. No need. The professor said, there's a Quidditch match today. Day off. His voice trailed into incomprehensible mutterings that to Edgar, William, and Ollie sounded like nothing but a string of syllables. 2, my $5 amp. Day. Edgar nodded as if he'd understood, then brightened. Then are you still going to watch the match? Gryffindor versus Slytherin. It's the first game. William and Ollie stared at Edgar in disbelief. You can actually get useful information out of that? He mouthed. He hadn't, really. He'd just assumed the most likely answer on the principle of, if Lynn's not worried, why should I be? Lynn, now fully awake, let the thought unfurl. Quidditch match? Since the dark arts tutoring had been cancelled and fishing usually yielded nothing, he was free. Might as well go watch. Scourgify! He pulled his wand and whisked his face fresh and alert. In seconds, he was upright and nimble. Let's go. The match should be starting soon. Shame we can't try out for the team until next year. The Quidditch pitch was buzzing, stands nearly full, banners snapping in the wind, cheers and boos tangled into a heated roar. As they found their seats, Edgar spotted a familiar face. Cedric, you're here too, he called. Cedric Diggory turned with a small smile. Edgar, yes, first match of the term. I heard Harry Potter was chosen as Gryffindor's seeker, so I thought I'd come. You should always know yourself and know your enemy, right? His gaze flicked to Lynn with curiosity. This is Lynn? Edgar talks about you a lot, says your flying is excellent, your technique superb. Interested in joining Hufflepuff's team next year? We could use fresh blood. Edgar also said you have a... Cough! Cough! Edgar erupted into a hacking fit and went beet red, cutting Cedric off. Lynn shot him a glare. He was definitely about to say broom. Edgar, catching Lynn's look, hurriedly mouthed an apology. I only said you had a very powerful broom. We were showing off. Slipped out. Nothing else, I swear. The stadium speaker crackled. And now, the players enter the field. Gryffindor and Slytherin swept onto the pitch. In the Gryffindor lineup, the thin figure with glasses stood out. The seeker was indeed Harry Potter. The match began amid Lee Jordan's exuberant commentary. The quaffle is immediately taken by Gryffindor's Angelina Johnson. She's a superb chaser, such flair. Jordan. Professor McGonagall's sharp warning cut through the air. Sorry, Professor. Lee replied without much apology and kept talking. Harry was noticeably faster than Slytherin's seeker, but then the Slytherin style showed itself. Small tricks, cynical fouls. So after that very obvious and despicable bit of cheating, Jordan, that open and revolting foul. Jordan, I'm warning you. All right. Flint nearly took out the Gryffindor seeker, which could happen to anyone. Lee finally said, voice thick with sarcasm. Lynn, confused, nudged Cedric and asked quietly, "Are Quidditch rules supposed to let people play like that? What's the difference between this and starting a brawl?" Cedric's expression mixed helplessness and mild scorn. "Usually it's Slytherin who plays like that. To win, they'll be a little unconventional." Lynn nodded in understanding. Shameless, then. His attention snapped when William shouted, "Look, what's wrong with Harry Potter's broom?" Harry's broom was bucking wildly, jerking under him as if trying to throw him. The situation looked dangerous. "It's obviously cursed," Lynn said, folding his arms as if the conclusion were inevitable. Edgar gripped his sleeve. "Really? Then what do we do? He won't fall off, will he?" Lynn pointed to the teacher's box. "Look, see that old man with the white beard?" He was, of course, thinking of Dumbledore, who sat there composed, as if unconcerned. Before anyone could speculate further, Harry suddenly dove with a near-ground, heart-stopping flight. He clapped a hand over his mouth and then, everyone's eyes widened, he swallowed the golden snitch. Lynn's mouth twitched. "What a glutton," he thought. "Are you catching the snitch or eating it?" Lee Jordan's voice, cracking with excitement, rang through the stadium. "Harry Potter has caught the golden snitch. Gryffindor wins, 170 points to 60. Gryffindor's stands erupted into a tidal wave of jubilation. Hufflepuff cheered politely, but Lynn just shrugged, even-handed. "Well, the result's good," he said, "but the whole match, what a spectacle." 36. He made his appearance. A little awkward. Knock, knock, knock. A rapid knock shattered the quiet of Lynn's dormitory. Lynn, absorbed at his workbench meticulously upgrading Magic Engine number 2, didn't look up. "Edgar, get the door," he called without diverting his attention. Edgar trudged over, muttering, and opened the door to find Cedric bursting in, breathless and pale. "Cedric, shouldn't you be at the pitch warming up for the match against Ravenclaw?" Edgar asked. Cedric leaned against the frame, still gasping. It's horrible. Merlin must have cursed it. My broom just started on its own, and I couldn't stop it. It smashed into that boulder by the corner of the pitch, completely ruined. Not even a mending charm would take it." Edgar frowned. "What are you going to do? We were going to cheer for you." "I had to come find Lynn," Cedric said, eyes darting past Edgar to the tinkerer at the bench. "Please, can I borrow his broom just for the match? I'll bring it back right away, I swear." Lynn paused, glancing first at the plain-looking first-generation prototype on the table, then at the number 2 part in his hand. The prototype was a clunky old thing on the outside, but full of hidden tricks. This would be the perfect chance to get real combat data. "Fine," Lynn said, handing over the broom and flicking his wand to temporarily disable the owner lock rune. He opened his mouth to warn Cedric. "Listen, this broom is my prototype. Its performance is a bit unusual, especially speed. You should." But Cedric had already grabbed it like a prize and was dashing away. "Thank you, Lynn. You saved me. I'll repay you after the match." He vanished down the corridor so fast he left an afterimage. Lynn's hand froze midair as his warning died unheard. The stands at the Quidditch pitch roared. Flags whipped in the wind. "Go Hufflepuff!" "Ravenclaw will win." Lynn and his roommates sat in the Hufflepuff section, stomachs in knots. Lynn worried Cedric hadn't had time to learn the broom. He hoped the boy wouldn't blame the prototype if things went wrong. The players streamed onto the field. Cedric took off on what looked like a Cleansweep 7. His takeoff and initial circling seemed steady, and Lynn exhaled a small, relieved sigh. Madam Hooch's whistle cut the air, and the match began. The quaffle shot back and forth, bludgers buzzed, and chasers and beaters clashed with full force. Above it all, the Seekers, Cedric and Cho Chang, circled, eyes sharp for a flash of gold. "Cedric Diggory has spotted the golden snitch," the commentator cried. At almost the same moment, Cho also caught sight of it. Both Seekers dove in a blistering race. "Look at Cedric's broom. It's changing," someone shouted from the stands. "It's speed, Merlin. How's it suddenly going that fast? Is that still a Cleansweep 7? It feels faster than a Nimbus 2000. As Cedric dove, his arm brushed a concealed runic mark, the skin-switching rune Lynn had hidden. The broom transformed instantly. The plain wood became a sleek, metallic gold and red shell sparkling like glass. The tail morphed from neat twigs into a sweeping plume of long, golden phantom feathers, as if a phoenix had lent its tail. Ember-like sparks danced along the edges. A clear, Majestic phoenix cry pealed out. Lynn had recorded Fox's call and rigged the prototype to play it. The sudden transformation and the cry stunned the whole stadium. Even the players turned their heads. The broom surged. Cedric felt a thrust behind him and pulled ahead of Cho. The snitch skittered near the wall. Elation filled him. His fingers stretched, almost there, when the broom shuddered as if it hit an invisible barrier. It went from full motion to frozen in an instant, hanging motionless in midair. No leaning or urging would budge it. The emergency anti-collision braking system Lynn had installed had engaged. The snitch made a sharp right-angle turn, slipped past Cedric's fingertips, and zipped away. Cho reacted faster, feathering a graceful maneuver and closing in. She's caught it! Cho Chang has caught the golden snitch! Ravenclaw wins, 160-10, the commentator cried, equal parts exhilarated and regretful. The whistle blew. Ravenclaw exploded in cheers. Hufflepuff fell quiet with disappointed murmurs. But no one was looking at the score. Cedric still hung frozen on his spectacular, stubborn broom, both hands clenched on the shaft, leaning forward with everything he had, arguing with it like a man bargaining with a stubborn animal. Move! Just move a little! You were flying great a second ago. Why now? You can't just change skins and forget the user experience. My victory just flew away. Cedric's desperate, tooth-gritted complaints and the absurdly showy phoenix broom beneath him drew every eye in the stadium. Professors and students alike wore expressions of shock, curiosity, sympathy, and bafflement. Lynn buried his face in his hands in the stands. He knew this would happen. Perfect. His Lynn brand broom had made its grand debut in the most dramatic, mortifying way possible. 37. Melee Professor McGonagall walked beneath the hovering broom, adjusted her glasses, and called up to Cedric. "Hold on tight, Mr. Diggory." "Accio broom." A flash of light struck the broom, but it only trembled and stubbornly stayed where it was. McGonagall looked taken aback for a moment. The anti-theft wards were clearly thorough. She tried several more counterspells and summoning charms in quick succession. Each time, the light from her wand tip forced the broom to twitch and travel a short distance, only for it to snap back to its original position, as if held by an invisible elastic cord with a whoosh. McGonagall pursed her lips, studying the magnificent broom. "I really want to blast this thing to pieces right now," she thought. In the stands, Edgar nudged Lynn with an elbow and grinned. "Lynn, why don't you go down there and save the day?" Lynn glanced down at McGonagall and rubbed his nose helplessly. Looking at the situation, I guess I have to." If he let McGonagall keep at it, Lynn worried his broom would be physically persuaded for good. He jogged to the Hufflepuff team's rest area and offered a sheepish smile to the senior beater. "Mate, can I borrow your broom? I'll bring it right back." The senior was puzzled, but handed it over. Under the curious gaze of the whole school, Lynn mounted the ordinary broom and flew to Cedric's side. "Lynn, I'm sorry, I think I broke your broom." Cedric's face was full of shame. He had promised to return it intact. "It's fine. It's got a security setting," Lynn said with a casual wave, pointing to the broom he'd brought. "You take this one back first. We'll swap." Cedric, still puzzled, carefully climbed onto the broom Lynn had borrowed. Lynn flipped nimbly and sat on the errant broom. Once he was settled, he tapped twice on a tiny radar icon disguised in the wood grain of the handle. With a faint beep, the broom responded. Then he tapped a clothes icon, and the broom's gaudy, shimmering finish faded, returning to a plain, slightly worn look. Lynn rode the restored broom and landed steadily before Professor McGonagall. McGonagall eyed him and the now docile broom beneath his feet, her gaze sharp behind her spectacles. "So, you made this broom yourself?" Her tone held a trace of disbelief. Lynn nodded. "Yes, Professor. First-year students are not allowed to bring their own flying brooms to school. That is a school rule, Mr. Lynn," McGonagall said, stern once more. Lynn muttered under his breath, head down, "Just unlucky today, running into you." McGonagall clearly heard him. The corner of her mouth twitched, but she didn't press it. After a beat, she announced so everyone could hear, "Considering you made this out of a passion for learning and alchemy, I will only deduct points. Detention is waived." She raised her voice. "For unauthorized modification and possession of a flying broom, Hufflepuff, 20 points will be deducted." Walking back toward the castle, Lynn felt countless eyes on his back and heard whispers ripple through the crowd. His little display had caused a sensation. A Slytherin in green robes stepped into his path. "Hello, Lynn," he said with an affected politeness. "I am Cassius Caro of the Caro family." Lynn blinked. What did he want? "Do you need something?" "That broom of yours. Will you sell it? I'll offer 200 galleons." Caro was blunt. Lynn almost laughed. 200 galleons? That wouldn't even cover the materials, never mind the engineering. His broom was a one-off, technically leagues beyond mass-produced models. The offer was insultingly low. He kept his tone calm but firm. "I know my broom's worth." "No." He started to move past them. Caro's face flushed with anger. "Who do you think you are?" he sneered. "A piece of trash putting on a show with cheap tricks. You're not fit to guard the gates of the Caro family, you lowly mudblood." Lynn stopped. The word mudblood sounded ugly and malicious, but he didn't fully understand its meaning. He almost turned to Edgar to ask, but Edgar's reaction was immediate and fierce. The usually smiling boy had gone crimson with rage, fists clenched, body trembling. "Shut up, you ill-bred piece of trash," Edgar roared, voice raw. "Who do you think you are, acting all high and mighty because of your family's dark wizard bloodline?" To Edgar, raised in the wizarding world, mudblood was the ultimate slur, the line you did not cross. Caro's remark hit him like a provocation, and his temper snapped. "You're dead. You're the one who's dead." Both drew their wands at once. Caro grinned viciously and shouted, "Densaugo!" Edgar fired back with Rictusempra. A spell that made teeth elongate collided with a tickling charm. Sparks popped where the magic met, neither side gaining the advantage. Lynn, still unclear on the exact meaning of the insult, but seeing his friend under attack and Caro obviously the aggressor, moved to back Edgar up. He drew his wand without thinking. "Opugno! Rictusempra! Rictusempra!" Edgar followed up. Lynn's first spell sent a swarm of pebbles and dead leaves hurtling toward Caro as if a furious hive had been loosed. Immediately afterward, he launched 2 tickling charms threaded among the stones to cover Caro's escape routes. Caught off guard by Lynn's speed and unorthodox tactics, Caro flailed his wand and tried to block the onslaught. Several pebbles struck his arm, and a grazing rictusempra tickled the hem of his robes. He let out a short, involuntary giggle before he could clamp down on it, his face contorting. The Slytherins, who had been watching with folded arms and smug expressions, suddenly changed. "Hufflepuff scum! Outnumbering us? Teach them a lesson!" Shouts rose as 5 or 6 Slytherins drew their wands. Light sparked from their wand tips as spells hurtled toward Lynn and Edgar. Depulso. Lynn reacted instantly, flicking out a spell to knock a piece of rubble flying in from an odd angle. He frowned. This was getting out of hand. With a backhand, he sent a precise, disarming charm at a Slytherin who'd tried sneaking up on them. Expelliarmus! A flash of red, and the boy's wand spun out of his hand and into Lynn's. He inwardly scowled. They were calling for backup? If you can't win, you gang up? 2 Slytherins charged in side by side at Lynn, Edgar, and the newcomers William and Ollie. Lynn thrust the captured wand forward. Torrential impact. A compressed, whirling column of water erupted like a dragon, striking the 2 attackers and flinging them down. He didn't stop there. He followed up with a pair of tongue-twisting jinxes that left them babbling incoherently. Yee-yee-ya-ya, unable to form clear incantations. Lynn gave the jinx a private thumbs up. Much better than Langlock. No counter-curse. Impossible to reverse. Peace and quiet. Before he could breathe, 2 more spells, one aiming to lock legs like Locomotor Mortis, another trying to force dancing feet like Tarantallegra, came barreling in. Protego, a shimmering shield rose, and the spells struck it with a metallic ring before dissipating. Lynn wasn't going to just take hits. He countered with rapid-fire, disarming charms. Expelliarmus! Expelliarmus! 2 more wands flew out of their owner's hands and into his grip. He was holding 4, maybe 5 wands now, like some absurd wand peddler. He tried to take control of the moment, calling to the remaining Slytherins. "Enough? Are we still fighting?" A Stupefy slammed into his still active shield with a bang, rippling the barrier. Lynn's patience thinned. His hands moved in a smooth, practiced sequence. Flipendo! A shove knocked one Slytherin back. Wingardium Leviosa! Lynn caught him. Descendo! And the boy was violently slammed down. The student who'd ignored the warning floated half a meter, then was jerked sideways and slammed hard onto the floor, curling up in pain and unable to get up for a long time. Lynn scanned the few Slytherins left standing. Calmly, "Are we still fighting?" They looked at their groaning classmates and at the handful of wands in Lynn's hand. Faces drained of color. They shook their heads like maracas, terror and refusal written plain. Only a fool would keep this up. A cold voice cut through. Snape had appeared as silently as a shadowed bat, black robes trailing, his dark eyes sweeping over the students on the floor, mostly Slytherins, before landing on Lynn's group, surrounded by wands and clearly at the center of the skirmish. Almost at once, another voice called, urgent and severe, "Can someone tell me what happened here?" Professor McGonagall hurried over, spectacles glinting, her expression stern. Lynn seized the moment and stepped forward, recounting events clearly and without exaggeration. Caro's rebuffed attempt to buy the broom, Caro's insults, Edgar's angry reply, and then the other side drawing their wands first and starting the fight. He made sure to stress the insult, mudblood, and that the other side had cast the first offensive spells. McGonagall's face tightened at the word. Before she could decide, Snape spun, fury searing through him as he stared at Caro, still groaning on the floor. Mudblood! Even at a whisper, Snape's words cut deep. "How dare you use such a filthy, despicable slur in the corridors of Hogwarts? Mr. Cass, has your upbringing been so neglected? Do you think your family background gives you license to insult others? You have disgraced Slytherin with your foolishness." His venom left Caro, who'd been hoping for support, stunned into silence. He lay on the ground, shocked. How was his own head of house condemning him? Snape then swept the remaining Slytherin students with a gaze that could freeze blood and through clenched teeth announced, "Because of Mr. Cass's extremely rude and offensive remarks, and for your involvement in a corridor brawl, Slytherin will lose 5 points. Now, all of you, follow me." He actually deducted points from his own house. Snape's black robes whipped as he led the dejected Slytherins away. McGonagall, satisfied the matter was being dealt with, left as well, after giving Lynn and the others a severe warning not to let this happen again. She also told them to return the confiscated wands to the students being treated by Madame Pomfrey. A hesitant voice with a distinctive drawl came from the shadow of a pillar. Lynn and the others turned. A pale, platinum-blonde Slytherin, fresh from the first years, had been hanging back, neither fighting nor following Snape. "Are you Draco Malfoy?" Lynn asked. Malfoys were hard to miss in the wizarding world. Malfoy stepped forward. Lynn held the handful of wands he hadn't handed back and raised an eyebrow, half teasing. "Do you need something? Not looking for trouble, I hope?" Edgar and the others went on alert. Malfoy hurried to look non-threatening. No, he said, forcing a pleasant smile. I wanted to talk about the broom you've got there." He paused, trying to sound sincere. "I'll offer a price I think you'll find satisfactory." Lynn's interest piqued. He was curious how much a Malfoy would value the broom. "How much?" he asked bluntly. 1,000 galleons. Lynn's eyes widened. The thought flashed through him. My goodness, these people really are loaded. 100 times what an ordinary wizard might earn in months. No, maybe a year. Throwing money at whatever they wanted. That was the Malfoy way. Malfoy watched Lynn's reaction and felt a twinge. That broom, so cool, so powerful, and apparently safe, was worth every galleon if it could outfly Potter's Nimbus 2000. Teeth clenched, Malfoy pushed the price higher. 2,000 galleons. The sum came out like a dare. The calm he'd tried to wear was fraying. Anyone could see the cost stung. If he hadn't truly been captivated by the broom's supposed intelligence and power, he wouldn't have offered so much. 2,000 galleons. Lynn's head spun with calculations. That was enough to buy the rare alchemical reagents he'd been pining for, expand the house in his trunk to twice its current size, and bankroll several potion experiments. Against 2,000 solid galleons, the little reluctance and craftsman's pride he felt about his homemade broom shrank to nothing. Principles? Years of tinkering? All flexible when an alchemist is about to run out of supplies. Sold, Lynn said without hesitation, his answer so sudden that Edgar and the others nearby nearly dropped their jaws. Malfoy's face lit up like a candle. Wonderful. When can we trade? Right now, Lynn replied, not giving the walking purse of a buyer a chance to change his mind. He told himself he couldn't be blamed for being money-hungry. The offer was far beyond what he'd expected. Who said purebloods didn't understand technical value? Young Master Malfoy clearly did. He might as well be Lynn's soulmate. Lynn wasn't worried about technical leaks either. He trusted the alchemical safeguards he'd put in place. Pulling 2 sheets of parchment and a quill from his pocket, he leaned on a nearby stone pillar and quickly scribbled a sales contract. The terms were blunt and precise. No returns. The buyer must not dismantle or analyze the broom's internal structure in any way. Any damage or consequences from doing so would be the buyer's responsibility. The seller had fulfilled his duty of disclosure, and so on. Soon, under Edgar and the others' stunned stares, money changed hands for the broom. Malfoy handed over a heavy, clinking velvet purse. Lynn gave him the broom, now back to its plain appearance, along with a detailed instruction manual. The manual listed switching modes, basic performance specs, the owner binding procedure, and daily maintenance precautions. "I'll take good care of it," Malfoy said, smiling. It was obvious he was delighted. "It's yours now," Lynn replied. He pointed to a key clause in the contract and reiterated it verbally. "Just so you know, the broom's internal structure is extremely precise and sensitive. Do not dismantle it. If you take it apart, it'll be ruined. Literally nothing more than a pile of firewood." He wasn't bluffing. "Of course," Malfoy answered eagerly, already absorbed by the broom and the manual. Lynn weighed the galleons in his hand and left satisfied. Malfoy couldn't help stroking the handle as he flipped through the manual, his eyes growing wider with each page. Surpasses a Nimbus 2000. Shape-shifting modes, automatic owner recognition, and anti-theft features. So worth the 2,000 galleons. Back in the Hufflepuff common room, having ducked into their dormitory, Edgar finally blurted it out, incredulous. William and Ollie gathered around, equally disbelieving. Lynn placed the money bag on the table with a satisfying thud, counted out the amount he'd borrowed, and handed it to Ollie Thorne, who had been quietly nearby. "Ollie, here. This pays back what I owed with interest. Thanks, man. You really came through." Ollie nodded and accepted it without fuss. Then Lynn swept his arm theatrically and announced to his 3 roommates, half joking, half proud, "You guys pooled your money to help cover my costs. Once I finish the 2nd-generation super broom with this, everyone in our dorm gets one. Imagine us all flying out together. Now that'll be prestige." He drawled the last line in mock nouveau rich fashion. "When you've got money, you can afford to be a little extravagant." An upper year found him later by the Black Lake, where Lynn had been staring blankly at the water with an empty fishing bucket at his feet. "Lynn, the headmaster wants to see you. The password is cockroach clusters," the student said. After thanking him, Lynn packed away his new fishing gear, muttering to himself, "It's not like I'm coming home empty-handed. The headmaster has business with me. The fish in this lake should thank Professor Dumbledore for sparing their lives." He took the familiar route to the headmaster's office. Dumbledore sat behind his large desk, gently stroking Fawkes's feathers. Thankfully, the headmaster wasn't holding that dangerously sweet-looking drink this time. "Ah, Mr. Lynn, you're here. Would you like something to drink? A cup of honey tea? Or perhaps a lemon sherbet?" "No, thank you, Professor." Lynn didn't want to test a phoenix's tolerance for saccharine, so he went straight to the point. "Is there something you need me for, Professor?" Dumbledore pushed up his half-moon spectacles. "Not a major matter. The alchemy branch of the International Confederation of Wizards is holding an alchemy competition in Switzerland for the new generation of wizards. As chairman, I feel it's important to support our colleagues and showcase the talent of Hogwarts' younger students." He paused and looked at Lynn warmly. "Would you be interested in representing the school?" Lynn was about to ask, "Why me?" when Dumbledore answered as if he'd read his thoughts. "I'd hoped for the Weasley twins. They have a certain creative flair, but there's only one slot." A chime sounded in Lynn's head. "Ding! Mission issued. Participate in the competition and obtain a ranking. Reward, Immortal Curse. Effect: any magic you cast can be attached with a curse. The victim will suffer continuous curse damage for 3 minutes, during which the curse cannot be dispelled. Guess where I got this? 5,000 galleons. Out-of-print manuscripts by deceased master alchemists. A system mission." Lynn's heart leapt. Alchemy consumed money. More funds meant better reagents, bolder experiments, and faster progress. The manuscripts alone could be invaluable. "I'll participate, Professor," he blurted, then hurried to sound noble. "Prize money aside, I value the opportunity to compete and exchange ideas with outstanding young wizards from around the world." Whether Dumbledore believed the magnanimous version or the greedy one didn't matter, Lynn felt it, at least for the 3 seconds after he said it. Dumbledore beamed. "Excellent. Prepare yourself. I will take care of your travel documents. A ministry official will accompany you. You will depart the morning after tomorrow." "No problem, Professor." 40. Switzerland. "Lynn, why are you packing? You haven't been expelled for secretly selling flying brooms, have you?" Edgar burst into the dormitory to find Lynn stuffing things into the undetectable extension trunk. He froze in alarm, panic written all over his face. William, who'd been reading, looked up, pushed his glasses up his nose, and set his book down with a solemn expression. "What? The school wouldn't expel you for that. You made those brooms yourself, and you were already docked points as punishment. No, I'm going to have a word with Professor McGonagall." He rose as he spoke. "Stop, stop, stop. Hold it right there." Lynn reached out and caught his two melodramatic roommates, half laughing, half exasperated. "What are you two thinking? Nobody's being expelled. I'm going abroad to compete." He explained helplessly how Dumbledore had invited him to represent Hogwarts at the International Freshman Alchemy Competition in Switzerland, mentioning the generous prize and the circumstances that led to the invitation. The tension in the room dissolved instantly and was replaced by envy and excitement. "Oh, so that's it." William resumed his calm, picked his book back up, and nodded. "Then good luck. Bring back a decent placing." Edgar leaned forward, grinning and giving Lynn a nudge. "Not bad. Lynn, international events. Don't forget to bring us back some local specialties. Swiss chocolate and cheese, I heard they're excellent." Ollie, who had been quietly watching, didn't say anything, but his eyes flicked between William and Edgar before he gave Lynn a small, meaningful nod. The message was clear. He wanted William's blessing and Edgar's souvenirs. The day of departure came quickly. Lynn and his 3 roommates met early on the open lawn in front of the castle. Morning mist still clung to the ground, and crystal droplets clung to the grass. A faint pop and a few sparks cracked through the air, and a moment later, Professor Dumbledore materialized on the lawn in his star and moon robes, smiling gently. Alongside him stood a man and a woman in formal wizarding robes, Ministry of Magic badges pinned to their chests. "Dad? Mom?" Edgar cried in disbelief. As the 2 figures became clear, the couple returned his astonished look. "Son, what are you doing here?" they said in unison. After a brief, warm exchange, Lynn learned the truth. Edgar's parents, Mr. Edward Burns and Mrs. Anna Burns, really were employees of the Ministry of Magic, just as Edgar had said. Both worked in the Department of International Magical Cooperation. Since the competition was an international event in Switzerland, the British ministry had to send someone to handle cross-border procedures and coordination, and the duty had fallen to them. Seeing their son on the way was a delightful surprise. Pleasantries over, it was time to leave. Edward Burns reached into his pocket and produced a grimy, empty beer can. "This is the portkey approved by the ministry. The moment's nearly here. Everyone touch it. It might be a bit uncomfortable the first time, so be prepared." Lynn, Dumbledore, and the Burns couple all placed their fingers on the can. Edgar and the others waved from nearby. "Have a safe trip, Lynn. Remember the specialties." Next thing Lynn knew, something grabbed behind his navel like a hook. His feet left the ground instantly, and his whole body felt forced into a giant rubber tube, spun and dragged by an immense force. The world around him dissolved into a blur of colors. He could hear the Burns couple making panicked sounds. Only Professor Dumbledore remained composed. The dizzying ride lasted perhaps several dozen seconds. As the colors began to coalesce into solid shapes, Lynn's stomach rebelled. He bent over and dry heaved onto the neatly paved stone beneath his feet. Fortunately, he hadn't eaten much that morning. "Child, are you all right?" Anna Burns's face was ashen. She tried to pat Lynn's back, even as her own nausea threatened to overwhelm her, and she soon produced a muffled retch of her own. "I'm fine, ma'am. Bleh. Just not used to it," Lynn lied, waving weakly. Another wave of vertigo hit, and he bent over again. Edward Burns fared marginally better, but kept his mouth clamped shut, sweat beading on his forehead. After taking a look around and confirming they'd arrived in the right place, he muttered with thinly veiled irritation, "Merlin's beard! Which artisan made this portkey? The ones I used on business trips were at most a little dizzying. I've never had my insides feel like they've been flung out like this." As someone who handled international travel regularly, he clearly had standards, and the experience had fallen far short. While the others clung to their dignity and the nearest curbing, Professor Dumbledore surveyed the surroundings with evident delight, as if the unpleasant transit had been an amusing sightseeing detour. Hearing Edward's complaint, he turned and, eyes twinkling, offered lightly, "Oh, it was quite the work of a creative hand. The gentleman who enchanted this portkey seems to favor a rather personal approach to dynamic spatial distortion." His phrasing was polite, his meaning was unmistakable. The portkey maker's craftsmanship left much to be desired. Lynn, young and fit and aided by the subtle regulation of his 100 skeletons 1 heart ability, soon steadied himself. The churning subsided. He straightened, took deep breaths of the cool alpine air, and looked around. They stood in the center of a small square paved with smooth gray stone slabs, moss stubborn in the cracks. The architecture was thoroughly Swiss and felt medieval. Timber-framed houses packed close together, dark beams tracing neat and asymmetrical geometric patterns on pale plaster walls. The roofs were steep and heavy with dark gray slate tiles, clearly built for heavy snow. Many windows jutted out with ornate sills holding overflowing boxes of geraniums and pansies. "Sk!" Lynn clicked his tongue, a small smile forming despite the lingering queasiness. "This place doesn't even need a filter for photos. I wonder if the witches and wizards here have quietly put fortifying charms on these old houses. They look like they've been standing forever."